Testing, testing. Heard from anybody else, Mark?
Okay, so mics are starting to go hot.
We'll take care of that.
Well, 4 people. Hey, Missy, all yours.
Right. Let's go ahead. We'll go ahead and call this special meeting of the Wayne County Board of Education to order. It is 6:34. We may have some others join us, but we'll go ahead and get things started. If you'll stand, we'll say the pledge. I'll lead us this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The records show that all board members are present in person this evening.
Yes, we are.
And, yes. Oh, did you get it? The first item on our agenda this evening, of course, is our legislative forum. So I'd just like to say thank you for coming and welcome. We appreciate your time and your effort to come and talk with us about some of our thoughts and concerns about our county, our community, our students. And we really appreciate you carving out some time in your evening to just come and kind of create an open dialogue and give us a platform. And also we'd like to hear some of your thoughts and ideas about ways that we can work together and just make the county even better. So
Thank you all for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
we can start with maybe some just general introductions if you want. That way everybody in the audience can kind of get to know us. So we'll start with Mr. Fuller.
I'm Scott Fuller. I'm the state senator for District 5, Wayne County resident, and all my kids went to school in Wayne County, and a lot of my grandkids go to school in Wayne County. So I appreciate y'all inviting me up here to be a part of this.
Thank you.
Ryan Browning, delegate, 28th district, which is basically central Wayne County. My first term and ready to get to work.
I'm Mark Maynard. I'm a senator for the 6th district, and I represent Wayne, Mingo, McDowell, and Mercer counties.
Michael Amos, delegate for the 27th district, which is northern Wayne County, Sarita Canova, Westmoreland area. Spring Valley is my high school up there that I cover.
Board members, if you want to introduce yourself as well, we'll start with Mr. Ross,
Mark Ross.
Johnita Jackson.
Missy Hall.
Todd Alexander, I'm the superintendent.
Dennis Ashworth.
Randy Troutwine.
Great. All right. So now that we've got all those formalities out of the way and everybody knows who we are, yeah. We can
Okay.
maybe we can get started with
Yes.
just some general questions, or you guys have anything that you'd like to present to us first, or would you like for us to just kind of start with some question and answers, and we'll just keep it kind of general and informal, if that's okay with you?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. I think if I can speak for the board here, I think one of our major concerns is our rising special education population. We have at least about a 30% ratio of our students that have some type of IEP or 504 or need of some type of special services. And if you are familiar with our county in the past, that's probably, we usually ranged from, when I was in school, probably a 10 to 15% range. Now we're over 30% in our county alone. So, Robbie, come on up. You're welcome.
Come on up to the front row. So we've had a couple guests join us, one by phone. Senator Craig Hart has joined us by phone, so he's on the speakerphone here. And then Commissioner Robbie Thompson from the Wayne County Commission is here as well.
Great. So we were just talking about our special education population and the rise that we've had over the past few years, especially. And we're seeing quite a funding gap for those services. A lot of that is coming off of our general budget because we are paying the overages because we're over state formula. But my understanding is there's not a lot of leeway in that formula for these extra services for these kids. And I know that there's federal monies that go along with that, but when you're at a 30% or above population, that money gets eaten up really quick. So we were just curious if you had any ideas or if there's any talk about covering those shortfalls for that special education population.
Well, I can tell you, I am in the education, on the education committee.
Great.
Again, this is my first
Right.
term up there, so, but education is really important to me. Do we have any idea what the increase, why is there a increase in what we're seeing in?
There's a lot of social emotional issues. There's a lot of
A lot of
we have
grandparents raising kids.
grandparents raising
Yeah.
kids.
Drug
There's a lot of
problems.
drug babies that are now in the school system. There's a lot of different things. I don't know if we can actually pinpoint.
I didn't know if there was, but I will, that's what I'm here for. And I want you all to know that any concerns you all have with your here in Wayne County, let me know and I'll take that to the committees and bring it up to them and we'll see what we can do for that.
We've provided you some numbers there at the table. The line graph demonstrates the special education population in Wayne County going back to 2014. You can see in 2014, there was 1,390. And this year, the 2024 school year, we have 1,514 as identified as special education. Now, what's interesting about that is over that same time period, there's been a overall loss of student enrollment year after year. So in 2017, we had over 7,000 kids in the district, and this is the first year that we've dropped below 6,000. And if you look at the birth rates for the area, that numbers projected to continue to drop. Our overall enrollment will continue to drop for the rest of the decade. That's true for the majority of the state. I think that there's about 4 counties, 2 to 4 counties that buck that trend. That's in the Eastern Panhandle, your Berkeleys, your Jeffersons. The rest of the state has been losing population and has been losing population for decades. And so that's what makes this especially challenging is what you would think that if our overall enrollment was dropping, that our special education population would drop as well in proportion. And it's the opposite. It's actually rising. And what's challenging with that is that if you have a student that's identified as in special ed, in not all cases, but in some cases, the staffing needs of those students are more intensive and it requires more adults per student than it does with the regular population. So it's been a challenge. And I believe that you would find that this is true for a majority of the districts in West Virginia, that although they're losing that overall population, that special education population continues to increase.
That's gotta be a burden on finding enough support teachers and stuff like that too. Are you behind on getting licensed?
Yeah, when you hear about the non-certified areas, the special education staff, that is our primary problem. So out of all of our positions, let's say we have 20 positions where they're not filled by certified staff, 18 of those would be special education positions.
The falling population is hurting us a lot of different ways. I know Delegate Dillon there has the same concerns I do about smaller schools. The state's probably going to force us because we can't afford it with the falling population. The money goes down. And there's 2 schools in the southern end of the county. I fight to try to keep them open.
Right. I agree with
And I know
Dennis.
Delegate.
Let me just interrupt you here. Just sorry, but I was just trying, let's keep it to special education first and then we'll hang on to that
All
because
right.
that's another point that we want to share with them as well. So
Yes, sir.
And
just for the record, we've had a couple additional folks join us. Travis Thompson, Wayne County Commission, and Delegate Henry Dillon. Appreciate you being here.
on the point of the increased percentage of special ed students,
to what do you attribute that as the population drops and that percentage continues to increase?
I think, and if you look at the line graph, a big part of that was the pandemic and schools being shut down as much as they were. So if you look at the increase in the numbers from 2020 to the 2025 projections, there was a significant increase. So there was a significant learning loss that occurred there.
Yeah.
I think that's impacting the numbers. There's other factors as well, as was mentioned previously, opioid epidemic, unstable home situations, that type of thing. All of that plays in.
What is the percentage of students who are identified as special education?
I can work you up a percentage really quick. In Wayne County right now, that total percentage is, and I'm recalling numbers from this morning, is approximately 25%. Now, some of the special education numbers are communications disorders, speech. So if you subtract that out, those numbers drop just below 20% for the entire district.
That's high.
Yeah.
Right.
And from what we're hearing from other counties, there's a similar trend going on in other counties as well.
Now, I don't know, does that include our 504
Mm.
plan? So
No.
if you include those students, that number is going to increase. So,
That does not include 504.
No.
so that's a higher number. We're pushing the 30% at that point.
What percentage of students are on a 504 that are not considered special education?
The students for special education are on IEPs. 504s are not considered to be in special education. So,
Right.
But
yeah,
Additional number there on 504 plans.
I don't have the number on 504 plans.
Missy, did you say that these numbers, you're not compensated through the school aid formula?
no, there are not all of them. Some of them are. If we're over formula, if we have, let's just say we're over with our aides, and we're 10 over, those 10 aides that we're over come off of our general budget. We're fitting the bill for those individuals. Even though they're required, it may be students that have severe disabilities and they are in self-contained classrooms who have, a teacher and 4 adults for 6 kids because of the needs of those children. So we have to provide those services for those kids that need them, but our budget doesn't always, or our state aid numbers, full-time employees don't always cover those particular individuals, even though they're required of us. So I think that's where we go over a lot, is with bus drivers because of transportation and aides because of the extra services that we have to provide for our students.
And so the school aid formula does not take into consideration the percentage of special ed students in your county, right?
Not
for personnel
Right.
purposes, no.
No.
Of course, we receive federal dollars for special education services,
Right.
but it does not cover the positions.
What does it cover? Because I'm
Any equipment needs, any expenses that go along with those classes, any outside services, therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, those type of things. There is some funding that covers some positions, but it's not near enough to cover the number of positions that are required.
Especially as our population in the schools drop. Of course, our funding levels drop, our full-time funding. So we're having a higher need, but we're not able to fund those with the state aid formula because we're losing student population. So
Do you have any numbers on how many of these students are transferring across the river into another state?
You mean transferring away from Wayne County?
Transferring to Kentucky or Ohio, yes.
You're talking about in the enrollment loss.
Yes.
No, we don't have any numbers at our fingertips here this evening, but yeah, we do track that from year to year.
Would you say it's significant?
Our most significant loss has been our most significant losses have been homeschool students and students to the Hope Scholarship. And sometimes those are homeschooled students as well. So our current number of homeschool students is 496. So going back to, and we traced this back to about 2012, the homeschool numbers rose each year by about 50 per year. And that stabilized right before the pandemic. And we had about 350 being homeschooled immediately prior to the pandemic. When schools shut down, that number went up significantly, went up close to 600. When schools reopened 5 days a week, that number returned closer to the 500 number, the 496 that we currently sit at. Hope Scholarship has resulted, there's been another 231 Hope Scholarship submittals. So we have about 727 students total that are homeschooled or receiving services through the Hope Scholarship. Now, some of that number is inflated because students who were already private school students, they had the ability to come back and enroll in public school. And if they stayed there for, I believe it was 30 days, then they could apply for the Hope Scholarship. So we had a number of students that came back for that 30-day period and then withdrew again. And so that's, you know, that number prior to the pandemic, we were sitting with about 350 students that we had lost out of the educational system for other choices. That number has increased to 727. And we don't want to argue against school choice or anything like that. I don't think here this evening. That's not the purpose of what we're talking about. What I would argue is that we do need to look, and you mentioned going across the river. There's a lot of folks that don't know that Hope Scholarship money follows students to out-of-state institutions. And so there are schools in Kentucky that are receiving Hope Scholarship money for their operations. We're losing students out of the Fort Gay area, and that money is transferring over into Kentucky. And I know that all the border counties are dealing with that, including up in the Eastern Panhandle and the Northern Panhandle. The one thing that we would ask is, and we've heard the governor say that they're, seriously considering broadening those options, and that's fine. We need to be our best version to keep students here. But the one thing that we would ask is that there be a level playing field with that. And so, for example, it seems to me that it would be something to think about, that these schools that are receiving this money should have to go through some type of accreditation process, just like the public schools do. So and the public knows where that money's going to, and that it's being used effectively in those schools. And then also assessment accountability, the reporting of assessment results, so parents can have a transparent look at the performance of those institutions as well. And again, the third concern being some of that money is going out of state. So I think it would be some consideration to limit that money to in-state institutions.
Well, do you know the dollar figure over the average student in West Virginia? Is it 11,000 approximately?
Jeb is our treasurer. That number changes each year. It's not that high.
Oh, really?
Jeb, the per pupil allotment is close
Not,
to
not Wayne County. I'm talking about the West Virginia, the average in West Virginia.
correct is 6,000.
Right around 6,000.
Now that's state money. You're not including federal money in that?
State money
Okay.
from the school funding formula.
Well, I was talking about the dollar figure that floats over every student's head. I think it's about 11 if you count federal money, right?
What we concentrate on is the 6,000 from the state.
So federal money is based on population of school age students in the state, no matter who's enrolled where. And that comes from the census as far as I know. So Hope Scholarship is like $4,500. Is that close to what they get? I don't know.
I think it's their
46 and change or something like that.
I think it's their state aid assignment number, that $6,000 assignment number that the district would get. I think that's what goes into that account.
My question is, what happens to all that federal money for a Hope Scholarship student?
Yeah, I would assume it would stay at the federal level.
No, it comes to the state of West Virginia.
Hmm.
I mean, because that's what we get to educate the students. And I can't get an answer to that, but it's, definitely West Virginia gets on average 11,000 per student to educate all the school age, no matter where it's at or whatever. It's just the average total money, state and federal. And so I've heard the argument that there's actually more money for the students, for our education system, for the students that enroll in Hope Scholarship, because there's that big pile of federal money that, the state isn't having to spend to educate that student that's doing the school choice thing. So
The only problem with that, Senator, is the fact that when you get federal money, there's guidelines and strings attached,
I don't doubt it at all.
and the way you spend it and where you spend it,
100%.
we have no ability or no understanding at all about how that could change. All we can do is ask for local changes.
My question is, where's that money?
Right, does it trickle down to the
I don't know.
school system?
Do we see any of it? I think is what we're,
Scott used to be a detective.
Right.
Maybe he can
down pretty low.
run that down.
Not to my knowledge, but we will inquire as well.
Going back to the percentages that you guys were talking about with IEPs and behavior disorders, stuff that I've talked to a few teachers, educators, and even some birth to 3 instructor therapists, if you want to call them that. And they're all saying the same thing, is that they see an overdiagnosis of behavioral disorders in our region, and up to including a certain doctor in the region that will do it over the phone without ever even seeing a child.
Wow.
Is there a way that we can kind of combat that and, have discussions on, if someone's being overdiagnosed for something, that we can, are there avenues? What I'm saying is that we can get around that to where it's saying, hey, this is just an out for the parents to say, hey, my child is whatever it is, put them in IEP. Now they're protected federally against any type of discipline or anything of that nature. And are you guys seeing that as much then? But these are Wayne County educators that I have spoke to about
Right.
this, and I
We
wonder
do
if that's
have
a
our
thing.
own psychologist, our own department that does their own analysis of these students and if it's behavior or
Yeah, so to go on an IEP, that data has to be there and has to be legitimate. Now, we do get a lot of doctor referrals for different things that might qualify a student for a student assistance team plan or possibly even a 504 plan,
Sure.
but wouldn't rise to the level of qualifying for an IEP. So usually there's some checks and balances in there to make sure that they're being properly identified.
We've sat in meetings over the last few weeks, and the one thing that I hear up in Charleston from a lot of these educators coming up there talking is discipline. They're not allowed to go above certain standards of discipline, and in some cases, it's disrupting the entire education environment for maybe 1 or 2 children in an entire school. And that their complaint was, we can't do anything about it because they are diagnosed with these conditions and they are on these plans, and so they have to follow these protocols or they get in trouble. So and it was kind of from when all of us went to school, backwards thinking as far as how these situations are being handled, where it's disrupting the entire school system, to accommodate a few. And if you're telling me now we're at 30% of, these types of cases, as far as, where they could go through this process and disrupt a classroom setting, and no wonder people are pulling their kids out of school. I mean, if I had a child in school and I know that they're not getting the education that they need because there's all these disruptions and there's all these things going on, I would probably pull them out as well. So I think that we need to figure out a way to combat the disciplinary problems going on, and give the teachers the power that they need to discipline these kids or go through the process of disciplining these kids and getting them away from the rest of the classroom so that they can get an education they deserve.
There's a percentage of IEPs that would come with behavioral issues, but it's a small percentage of the overall number.
Sure.
So a number of those IEPs would be like learning disabilities, things like that. Those are kids that behave as normal. Where the struggles came for the state and for the teachers is when you were in school and when I was in school, you didn't see that at the elementary level,
Right.
and that's changed. We
Those
deal.
were the cases I heard were at the elementary.
Yeah.
level.
Pre-K.
I would go so far as to suggest that when we were in school, we faced a certain number of consequences, if we exhibited certain behaviors. And I would suggest that in more modern years, consequences have been either deferred or routed a different way or watered down, or we found all sorts of different avenues or labels to place on the behaviors to avoid consequences for actions. But at the state level in our code, we don't really provide our teachers with the tools to enforce those consequences. And, I'm not even referring necessarily to corporal punishment necessarily, but something that the children will understand and respect. And when we're dealing with early childhood in particular, children of that age don't understand deferred punishment. They don't understand, detention a few days from now. They understand I did this now, and this is a bad thing that happened to me, and I didn't like that, so I'm not going to do this anymore. And that's what across the state, I think we're missing that support for the districts and the schools to be able to implement immediate and understandable consequences that, pre-operational children can understand. Again, I don't want to preach and harp on corporal punishment, but there has to be some negative consequence that they don't appreciate or enjoy when they do something that's inappropriate in a classroom setting. And I would go so far as to suggest that the PBIS system, which has some success, over the long term is going to disappoint. I think we need something other than just positive behavioral supports and rewards for things done well. That's important, but especially in that early childhood, if you don't ingrain that in the psyche of a child before they're 10 years old or 8 years old or 9 years old, by the time they get to middle adolescence, you're in trouble. So,
To piggyback on that, do you see a lot of, like we're having a hard time or difficult time filling our teachers' positions or whatever? Do you see that as a deterrent for people wanting to become teachers? Because, I equate that with law enforcement, for example. The change that overcame our society with law enforcement, it was the lack of accountability for those who caused an issue. And I could see, because, being a teacher, and as you know, Missy, I've got teachers in my family, and I hear the horror stories that they have to go through. And it's just, as a teacher, you want to do the right thing, but you're handcuffed, it seems like, to be able to,
Well, Scott, that all came about, number one, society changed, and what he was talking about, Delegate Browning, parents were different then. You got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home too.
well, true.
That's not happening so much now.
Yeah.
And
Which really requires more.
And this other stuff came about, the lack of corporal punishment stuff, because of litigation. People
Well-
get sued and
True.
and I never did, when I was teaching, I didn't want to hit anybody else's kid.
Well, I understand
That was
but
up to their parents,
what I'm getting at is to,
advocated solely for corporal punishment. I believe he was suggesting that specifically in the younger grades, the teachers need to have the ability to correct students without worrying about their own jobs, not only to correct that particular student, but to make the other students feel safe and engaged.
And so they can,
As a teacher, a lifelong teacher, I can tell you, I've seen this problem grow more and more. And I know from speaking to parents that many of them have stated that students that were not their own students were the issues that drove them out of the schools and into home schools or private schools or charter schools. You know, 25% on an IEP is high, and I understand that you're mostly diagnosing those students there at the school. Now, I certainly don't want to say that anyone shouldn't have an IEP. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I also wonder, to pick up on the gentleman's point about the hardships on the teacher, if the teacher has multiple preps or multiple periods throughout the day, and they have multiple individualized learning plans to make individualized modifications, how many individualized modifications is that teacher making each night that they really don't know if they're going to be, you don't know if you're going to get 10 of them or maybe 100 of them in a course of a school year, and how many teachers want to stick around for that?
yeah.
Right.
So, you know, there's a multitude of issues, but I think a lot of this may really spin out of control, given what the Doctor of Education there stated. If we don't have the ability to correct these children at a younger age.
Senator Fuller.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, I think that is, when you go back and you look at it, and again, I'm not an educator, although I did go to school to be a teacher, but I'm not an educator, so I'm trusting, that you all, know what I'm talking about. But it just seems like that the root of all the problems that we're having in, school, which bleeds over in society in general, what is the fact that we don't hold children accountable for their actions. And kids are, again, I have kids, so I can speak on this pretty knowledgeably. If you don't tell them something's wrong and you keep appeasing them, it's going to make it so much harder to get them to do that's kind of, if you can get that down, I would believe that you could get the rest of the issues would be handled like a trickle down effect. I just feel like, I don't know, maybe you all can explain why do we not have the discipline in schools like we used to have?
That is a legislative issue that needs to be
Is that
addressed.
something that
That
we
certainly
can?
is. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I do know there is a discipline bill that you probably worked on last year that they've tweaked that will be coming up again this year.
Good.
So
And we all know that if a teacher says that a child does something and they tell their parents, their little darling wouldn't do that.
Of course.
Most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Right.
They won't take the teacher's side, they take the child's side.
Right.
Yeah, part of it, and part
That
of
makes
it
it
relates
hard.
to the general family breakdown. I mean,
Sure.
It is, yeah,
Gosh,
it is.
It's amazed me since I've been on the board to realize that, I mean, in some of these broken homes, people are doing great jobs, are doing the best they
Yeah.
can. But I was blessed 100 years ago when I was in school, had a stable home life, and most of the other kids
We did.
And I know that's not the situation now.
It's a very complicated problem. And one of the reasons it's so complicated is because that behavior's moved down to such a young age.
Yeah.
So you take a kid in kindergarten and, these kids have been born with opioids in their system. They have psychological issues. There's been trauma in the home, that type of thing. So we can tighten up the discipline, and I agree with you that needs to occur, but you send that kid home,
Right.
and then he's home for 5 days,
That's right.
and then he's back.
Yeah.
The problem is, I think that the majority of the districts are having is finding out, what changes that behavior, because the more the kid's out of school,
The worse
the worse
the behavior becomes.
Yeah, it doesn't improve. The worse it becomes, and the further behind, and then society's going to be dealing with them at some point.
I believe society's dealing with them at that point. If they're in a classroom with 20 other students, those 20 students are dealing with them.
Right.
And this is certainly making an impact on those 20 students. And I would say that if they're having that hard of a time getting along in the classroom, it's not making a positive impact on those 20 students. In fact, I would say from my own experience, it's making a very negative impact on those 20 students.
Delegate Dillon.
Senator, to build on top of that, also you have the contagion effect in which other students see, well, this student acted out and didn't see any meaningful consequences, so I'm going to try the same thing, and it kind of spreads from there. But I'm wondering if maybe one of our board members or the superintendent could to speak to the current policy on recess and what measures you can take, because my understanding of the law right now is that you're limited severely on how much recess time that you can restrict as a punishment for, bad behavior or whatever. And
Yeah, that changed. I don't know how many years ago, but yeah, you're not supposed to take away recess time.
Yeah.
Who
So-
makes those changes? I'm sorry, let me just ask that question.
I don't want to misspeak.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that was a state board of education thing, but I'll get back with you on that to clarify.
So my thought there is, I'm the last one to want to take away activity time from kids
Yeah.
because they need to be up and moving around and everything. But my question would be, is there a way, maybe through state code, that we can increase the total amount of activity time, and then we can have, part of that time where we have more latitude to take away. And that way we would have a
That makes sense.
punishment measure there. And also we would be working out some of that excess energy at the same time.
Superintendent,
Yeah.
Yes.
like Senator Wolf
The kids that
wants to
didn't get
call
punished
in.
would love that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of a rule.
I can text the number or get his
Is
cell phone.
that being positively received? Because I would be strongly in favor of supporting legislation on that as well.
I don't have my phone with me.
Increasing time to allow kids to be kids is
I
incredibly
looked it up
important,
before.
and having that
Let me see if I can get
parent
this
to
number up here.
sometimes take away or to lead,
Are we
I
off?
believe would be beneficial.
Let me,
Me and Mark will take care of it.
You have it.
You got it?
Okay. You have his number.
And we know that exposure to actual outdoor sunlight has extremely positive effects on psychology and mood. And that's going to filter through, to behavior as well.
let me say real quick, and I want to say one final thing about homeschool. There was a time where the homeschooling assessments had to be turned in at every grade level, and that changed.
Yep.
And I'm not sure when it changed, within the last decade or so. But the assessments from homeschool families are due on third grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, and 11th grade. And I would just propose to you from my end of things that we would like to see that on an annual level where we can see those kids' progress to make sure that education is actually happening. There is a lot of good homeschooling families. I know some of them personally. I have some of them that live on my street that do a fantastic job. I see a number that are registering their kids for homeschool to avoid truancy charges. And because their kid is getting in trouble at school all the time and they're tired of dealing with the administration or dealing with the teacher on the discipline issues, and then they're pulled out. And I believe that there's little to no education going on in a significant percentage of those cases. So just for your consideration. Yes, sir.
Senator Wolfle. Okay.
Yes, I mean, completely misreading this. I've been listening, and I work with older students, high school students, and little kids are a different matter.
Okay, you're on
But
speakerphone now.
there's a truancy issue typically in my experience, my professional experience as an educator. And if that student finds success outside the traditional brick and mortar school, perhaps in homeschool or perhaps in military school, I'm always excited to see that. But I noticed that if we take these kids that don't want to be in school and we force them back into school, that may not exactly alleviate the problems that you're having in school. In fact, I would say that be fuel on your fire. It may get you a few more dollars, but you certainly wouldn't want to run everyone else off. And from a professional point of view, for being in the classroom for my adult life, and I suppose my entire life growing up as a that might be something to consider. That if students are finding success elsewhere, and sometimes that's hard to gauge academically, though it should be, but sometimes the total success of the student isn't just seen and solidified learning that's measured on a Scantron sheet. And there's the idea that if a 16-year-old young man doesn't want to be there, he may make everyone else miserable as well. And you may lose more students because of that. Underlying that I see is that parents often state, I want my kid out of school because so-and-so's kids is ruining it for everyone.
Do you have any suggestions on that?
That question pointed to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough one. And you hit, the family structure and whatnot is often not there. However, I have found that typically speaking, in my own professional life, those families that don't care, let me caveat this, the overwhelming amount of families who send their kids to public school every day care, they love their kids, and want the best for their kids. However, those parents who simply do not care and do not want their kids around are the first ones to put their kids on that bus to get them over there so we can watch them for them. If a student goes homeschool, sometimes maybe it's not the best situation, and maybe it's better than they are in school. But to just say, we think that Johnny somewhere isn't living up to his full potential and algebraic equations, therefore we must severely punish all parents and all people of choice, may not be the best answer. That might be a little knee-jerk.
Yeah.
Now, I understand it's difficult to see a student leave and not be able to track their performance, but there might be a whole lot more at play and things to consider than what first meets the eye. And especially when it starts coming to a high schooler, a 17-year-old young man that doesn't want to be there and truly doesn't have anyone at home that wants them to be there, that might be the absolute nightmare for everyone else in that classroom. Now, that may not be so in your schools, but I can tell you for the last 15, 20, I don't even know how long I've done this, it's been the case that I've seen.
It sounds to me like all these, there's a lot of problems, a lot of things, I think the number one thing that we need to do as legislators and as a state in general is we need to prioritize our education. We need to make it better for you all to be able to, so that we can make all these other things we can do if we prioritize. And I just don't think we have. I mean, I know people say that it's a priority, just like they say, police are a priority or whatever. Talk is cheap to me. And if you really want to have a top-notch education system in the state of West Virginia, we have to prioritize it.
And throwing money at a problem doesn't always fix that problem.
No, but
Yeah.
prioritizing it is prioritizing it from every angle.
Well-
Financially, legislatively,
Right.
all those things that are going to help the system.
I know at the legislature, they share some of the economic numbers with you. And I know, West Virginia is ranked last or next to last in workforce participation rate. As you move into Southern West Virginia, that number is even worse than the state's number. And so as we're trying to, it all funnels into the economic development and the success of the education system.
But I will be here, I will venture to say that you fix the economic system by building a better
Agreed.
education system.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Just like you do with law enforcement. No one's going to come to this state if they don't feel like they can, number one, keep their business safe. And number two, if the workforce, if we can't provide a education system that's appropriate for people coming here to work. I mean, they're just not going to do it. And I think all that is, it's a bundle of things that you have to do, but you can't you have to prioritize what I think are the most important things. And again, it's like you can't get the cart before the horse. You're not going to get these big, jobs if we are not prioritizing the most important things to families, and that's education and safety.
I think laws have been passed with good intentions. Like that 16-year-old he was talking about, in order to keep them in schools somewhere down the line, the legislature said, okay, you can't get a license, you can't drive unless you're in school.
Yes.
Is that something you think should be changed? That if a student is not in school, that maybe like other states, we allow them to participate in the workforce or somewhere else or within their family and be able to obtain that driver's
Well, the
license?
movement is to CTE, community technical education anyway. So if he's not interested in the academics and he can get into a job where he gets some training and some education, some trade, he would be better off there because he could be a productive citizen and make a living for himself. My big problem is when that don't happen, and I'm afraid that down the road with so many of them going to home schooling and stuff, and us not knowing what level they're working on and stuff, that we're going to have a lot more of them that are unable to provide for themselves. That's a worry. I mean, I look at it from a past law enforcement experience and also as an educator, and it worries me.
You give you give testing, solidified education testing. Those students who are perhaps more of your concern that they're not getting an education, are you seeing a big increase in their learning and outcomes on a standardized test between the age of 16 and 18? I mean, to hold them in school, I know that I was the biggest pain. A lot of people have this idea that I'm the biggest pain now, and I may be.
I couldn't imagine
that.
that.
I was absolutely terrible between the ages of 16 and 19, and you certainly didn't want me in your classroom. And that may be the case for a very small minority of our students. And I can tell you that if you put one dangerous student, I'm not saying I was dangerous, one dangerous student in your classroom or in your school, for every 200 kids, you would change the culture of that school. I mean, it is palatable when you walk through the door.
Well, one of the things, again, we talk about it's all about prioritization. And people say we don't have the money. That's the first thing you'll hear. We don't have the money to pay teachers this way. We don't have the money to pay, law enforcement, whatever. I guarantee you, if I went down that budget, I could find multiple things that are nice to have, but they're not as important. So when I'm talking about prioritizing something, I mean, you may have to do without some nice to have things way down the bottom of that state budget. But if you're really serious about fixing the problems we have in West Virginia and make it a place where people want to come, we already have, I'm telling you, we've already accomplished the fact that people love our state. I mean, we're getting a lot more people moving in. I know the birth rate may be lowering, but there's more people moving in the state of West Virginia per capita than anywhere else.
Good.
So we've got that, people know it's a great state, great people. But now this is a prime opportunity for us to keep them here, keep their kids here.
Right.
And we're not doing it. And again, people want to talk about prioritizing things that are important. And I will be the first one to say that education and security are two of the things that people want to have.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I think we as legislators need to go up there and.
Did I jump in here?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sure I interrupted at least one or two people there, but I've been listening the whole time. I couldn't get out there tonight, and I told Missy that. But so I'd love to be there, but I tuned in promptly at 6:30, and I've learned a lot already. But I just wanted to add a couple thoughts. One, to say that in my 10 sessions, if you need the
echo what Scott Fuller just said, which is, first of all, the first priority of government is the public safety. So we deal with that first, but then you get to a fundamental constitutional right under our state constitution to an education for these children. So I'm not saying we put the whole budget there, but there is money. They always find money. Leadership does, but it's a priority. And thank you for letting me speak to that.
Thank you, Mike. That's great.
Mike, you're exactly right. When they formed the state constitution, public education was a big part of it.
Yeah. So it's in the Constitution as a priority. So why don't we, as a legislative body, make these people force us to make it a priority? But that's going to take people from all. We're not going to be able to do it just ourselves. It's going to take parents going and saying that this is what we want. Because you may not be able to have this, that, or this.
Right.
Delegate Dillon.
Choice.
So, and I think, to build off that, when we discuss making education a priority, we need to sort of clarify and define what we mean by that. And oftentimes I've seen that in this discussion around education and educational leadership, we hear talk of stakeholders. And we hear talk of the business community and economic development and all these things, which are, important things. But I think we need to do a better job of collecting useful data and experiences from the students themselves, because I think we're losing a little bit of sight of what that daily experience is like for Johnny or Susie, and who is going back to mom or dad and saying, you know what? If there's any other option here, I think I'd like to take it. And I'm not really enjoying, or I'm not really into what we're doing at school. And this experience, we need to better understand that. I don't know if we have the tools right now in place to do that at the state level. I think we need to work on quantitative studies and qualitative studies. I have a few things I'm working on to that effect, but we need to get a grasp on what it's like in 2025, because we're still thinking about what it was like in, I don't know, for some of us, 1980, whatever, or 1970, whatever, or, but a lot of things have changed. And a lot of times, as adults, we think back to the times, that we experienced, and that's what we compare things to. And we make assumptions that children today are having a similar experience, when maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I think we need to place a greater focus on, understanding where they're coming from.
I totally agree with that, but it starts with money.
Right.
You got to have money to do these things. And in order for you to get money, it has to be a state priority. Go ahead.
Just to build on what Dr. Delegate.
That it starts with methods. If you want to build a traditional America, you have to build a traditional adult. And to build a traditional adult, you must provide them a traditional schooling, a traditional education, a traditional moral compass. And, we speak of our state constitution, and it does have public education written right into it, but it also has morality itself written into it, and it points towards God. Now, that may be a fine line to walk, but we should certainly be striving to walk towards morality, especially when it concerns our elementary students, because as someone has pointed out, they may not be getting it at home. And if you have someone who has a moral compass that's a little out of whack, if you have a child that goes to a school and sits there and sits under artificial lighting all day and hears a bunch of, how do I want to put this? That child may not be a happy child.
Right.
We need to create happy children. We need to have children that have a traditional education. They need to be able to enjoy their time at school. They need to have recess. They need to feel safe from their other classmates. And they certainly need to feel like their teacher is happy teaching them, and they're not overwhelmed making individualized plans, not just for one student, for perhaps 50 to 75% of the students in their classes. We need to make sure that there's quality education for every child. And if we're hitting numbers of 25%, I'm concerned. Now, I'm not saying that any of those students don't need an IEP, but if we're hitting 25% of the general population, and then we throw on a 504 plan on top of that, are we potentially having teachers with 100 individualized plans that they have to make on a daily basis? And how much time could they possibly put into the joy of teaching and pushing just traditional pedagogy out onto their team, their students? You know, money is important. I can tell you money is important, but if we don't get the basics right, we're not going to have anything besides a disaster. And that's exactly what we've been going through for the last generation. It's only getting worse. And I may remind you that if you don't focus on what you want, well, it's very easy to focus on how we do things. I think we need to focus on why we do things and make adjustments as needed, if that makes sense. And I think that the legislature needs to do what they can to fund the schools, that the legislatures need to find what needs to be taken away that's holding the schools back. And I want Wayne County, I want all the schools to be the shining star of education in the state of West Virginia. I think that's where education needs to be. It's written into our Constitution. But to simply throw money at something, and I just keep thinking that if I have 25% of my students with an IEP and possibly another 25% with a 504, I couldn't comprehend teaching 7 different preps with that many modifications. I don't think I could do it. You paid me $300,000. I don't think I could do a quality job of that.
Senator, this is Delegate Dillon. If I might try to sum up what you're getting at there, are you suggesting that we need to consider starting with the end in mind and what the purpose of education is before we, enact the next round of investment or, deploy more resources toward education?
That's exactly, in a nutshell, what I'm suggesting.
Okay, well, I'm not arguing with that, but what I'm saying is all those things, it's not just financial. When you're talking about priorities, it's not just the money, it's prioritizing education, whatever it's going to take. Now, some of it's going to be money, some of it's going to be, further, I don't know. I'm not a teacher, but, it's all that encompassed. It's, people want to be quick to jump on everything. When you say priority, it means money. Yes, it's going to have to take money because you have to operate. But that's not all it takes. When you're prioritizing something, you give it all the resources you can, and that comes from and that's a true prioritization. And we are not doing that in the state of West Virginia. We look at Ohio, and you get tired of hearing the whole fact that Ohio's got this great school system, but they got more money, they got this and they got that. They got a bigger population too, and there's a lot more kids there, a lot more schools that they got to pay for. We can't keep using that as an excuse of saying that, we don't have those reasons. We don't have it because we do. We have to do without other things. But we can't keep using that as an excuse and expect everything to fix itself because it's not working. And until we get that.
Department of Education on Front Street in Ohio, to reinforce your point, doesn't have nearly as many tentacles and hands-on the public education system in Ohio. They allow the teachers and they allow the schools to do their jobs. Our Department of Education has to be the most meddling department of any state I've ever heard of in my life.
I don't know about that. I'm just saying it's all I'm saying is we get compared, to Ohio, Pennsylvania. You look at all those, even Kentucky. I mean, we have got to make a decision as a state to say, we're tired of being down here at the bottom of the pile. And when we've got good teachers, we have great teachers. We got Marshall, which is one of the best teaching education universities in the country. It's right here in our backyard, and we're letting those teachers walk out the door and go somewhere else, North Carolina, wherever. And because we can't pay them what other states can pay them, and that's an important part of it. So when you talk about financing, when you say you're going to keep the teachers here, one of the things we have to do, we have to provide them the benefits that they deserve the pay that they deserve. And they can walk right across the river and make a whole lot more money, or go to Maryland. You're talking about the Eastern Panhandle. They can go over to Maryland or Virginia, wherever, and make more money. And so obviously, to me, that's not a priority. We would look at that and say, well, all these other states are doing it, and we can't keep using. We have a lot less population than some of these other states. I understand that. But again, we're going to keep spinning our wheels until we make a commitment. So that's what we want to do. And that's going to be the launching pad for us to get economic growth to the rest of the state of West Virginia. Because we are right now, we're not in a position to be able to recruit these businesses in here. We're working on some of that stuff on this side of it. But we have to get the education part of it hammered down. So I'm all for you guys. I mean, I'm going to do, what I can to go up there and hold their feet to the fire. You're going to campaign on education being a priority. Well, then, by golly, you're going to make it a priority, because that's what I'm wanting to do. It is a priority to me, and I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to, top of my lungs, I'm going to, scream out that we need to make it a priority. And I bet you they're going to say, well, we really don't have the funding. Well, let's go down that budget.
Missy.
I think we have,
Yeah. What's the priority in education that we're shooting for? I mean, I hope that doesn't sound like a stupid question, but are we trying to hit test scores? Are we trying to hit students who are not lashing out? Are we trying to get rid of some of this regulation? I go through regulation in the state that is so burdensome that I don't teach anywhere near as much as I have formerly. Are we going to pay the teachers? Are we going to take the students who are a danger out of the classrooms? Are we going to go in and start giving kids recess? Are we going to have a traditional school? Or are we going to go straight into STEM, more computers, and just have them locked inside all the time and claim instructional time is the most important?
Well, I think that's going to be decided
We need to have
amongst.
some studies as to what we want to do in the state of West Virginia, and what the experts want to do, and what the people of Wayne County want to do may be very different. And I would side with the people of Wayne County over the experts any day of the week.
Thank you.
I want to interrupt here just a second. We've got a parent that would like to speak, and we have a delegate that would like to speak.
Oh, that's parent first.
Okay, I think now would be the perfect time for you guys to focus on bringing jobs to the county manufacturing,
That's a great idea.
especially in the southern end of the county, with the tariffs.
Sorry. I can't hear.
You need to jump in.
It's all right.
I agree, and that is a priority. See, that's the difference, and that is a priority for us. But here's the problem: you were recruiting businesses to come here. There's a lot of what they look at, and as a police officer, Dennis could probably tell you the same thing. I can remember businesses coming to our police department, wanting to look at the police reports and what the crime rate was. That was a priority for them. See, they have priorities too. And if we don't meet their priorities, because that's our job, is to make sure these businesses, we meet their priorities. And that's education and safety.
And I'll just say this, on the southern end of the county, everyone knows what we've been dealing with, and Senator Maynard's been working hard on this, and I've been working hard on this. You're not going to have businesses where they can't have reliable infrastructure like water that, can be used in the business.
True.
And so, that's a thing that's a huge challenge that we need to address this year, which doesn't directly pertain to education, but it kind of does because, you're a huge consumer of water, first of all. Secondly, there's a meeting tomorrow morning, in Mingo County at the commission for Mingo PSD to raise rates. And, so half of Wayne County is going to be dependent upon that decision that comes out of Mingo County. So that's where I'm going to be in the morning tomorrow. I'm going to have to take, time off work or whatever. But, things like that have to be in place, because you just can't go out, pitch into a company. We have water 30 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just bring a bucket there.
That's true.
Delegate Amy.
Things you take for granted.
Mike.
Yeah.
I understand the concern. My biggest thing, what is a regulation or a piece of legislation or even just a rule from the Board of Education at the state level, what can we take away to give you all? You all seem like you're competent to be able to get this done.
Right.
What is standing in your way that would allow you to do what you want without needing more money, but just what are the hurdles that we could remove?
The funding flexibility would be
Funding
helpful.
flexibility.
Right. Our funding comes earmarked in a lot of ways. Different steps can only be used for different certain things.
And I know that there's one issue that we have later down as a question. I'm not sure where it's at, but the step 7 funding, we're the size of our county and stuff right now.
Uh-huh.
And Mr. Alexander can explain it a little better. Probably I know about it, but the way that we're funded is student teacher ratios and whatnot. So Todd, Mr. Alexander, if you don't care, go ahead.
Yeah, that's becoming more of a challenge. So you have a sheet in front of you that is the up at the top. It says preliminary computations, public school support program, personnel ratios per 1,000 students. And so this lists the entire state, and then it gives you a state average at the bottom of the page. So under the school funding formula for professional educators, this indicates the number of positions that we will be provided per 1,000 students. Now, we have approximately 6,000 students. So you can take that number there for Wayne, the 72.45. You can multiply that by 6, and that would tell you how many positions they would give us. Now, if you look in the second column, the 80.14, that's the number that we actually employ, that we have on the books.
These are teachers.
These are professional educators,
Professional,
teachers, counselors. So the difference between those numbers equates to about 45 positions. So that's about 45 positions that were out of formula that we have to pay for out of local tax dollars, out of local tax collections. And then if you go on the right, you see the service personnel, you see the ratios there. And so the rural schools, I think I heard in the news media report that there were more school closures this year than in reported history and ever. And what's happening is what we were discussing earlier. You have all these counties losing enrollment, 51, 52, 53. You have all these counties losing enrollment. And so they're trying to operate smaller and smaller schools under the funding formula, but the funding formula is based upon the total enrollment. It doesn't separate them by school or anything like that. So what happens is if you keep these small schools open, you go more and more over formula. 85 to 90% of our budget is spent on personnel, and the higher that we go over formula that we're having to pay for out of local tax dollars, if you get around 90% or higher in that number, you're not going to be able to sustain. So that's why you're seeing these districts have to shut down these schools. So this year I had spoke with the board about Genoa and Dunlow, which is our 2 smallest schools. Both are sitting with an enrollment approximately 50 or so. 50 students. Yeah. 2 of the smaller schools in the state. And as we continue to, and it's not so much about their enrollment as it's about the district's overall enrollment. And again, it's projected to go down for the rest of the decade just on birth rates alone, not counting any other factors that we've discussed here this evening. So if that enrollment continues to drop, it's going to be financially unsustainable. That we're going to have to shut down those schools to be able to keep the budget balanced. So the question came up during some of those meetings that we were having discussing those schools, what could be done with the state funding formula to help keep those smaller schools open. If you look at the bottom of the page, you see the state numbers, and you'll see the actual net enrollment. So the average county in the state has 77.95 positions per 1,000 students. Even though they're only being funded for 72.45, the average has 77.95. And then you see the numbers on the right for service. The average county in the state is 61.5 service positions per 1,000 students. If the state funding formula was based upon the averages of the entire state, that would decrease our numbers over formula and would make it more likely that we would be able to keep smaller schools open.
Can you repeat that? Just that last little part you just said.
The average numbers
Yep.
that are
What
the
is it
state
based on?
average,
It's based on the state average instead of the county average.
if it's based upon the state average instead of just looking at each county independently, if the funding formula was based upon, for example, for the professional educators, if the number that they used was 77.95
Right.
instead of the 72.45 that they're currently using.
Right.
Well, instead of being 45 positions over formula, we'd be about 15 positions over formula. We can work with that.
I was gonna say, that's much more
That's-
comfortable. That's,
Doable.
yeah, for us, it's doable with
Right.
county funding or with our county levies and whatnot. We can do that. And whenever I started talking about this roundtable thing, that was the biggest issue that I wanted to address, because the legislature can change the formula. We've talked about it before. It's never gotten very far, but when they see it as a statewide issue, hopefully, with you guys up there, if you'll advocate for that maybe we can get that looked at as a statewide and everybody will join in and see what we're talking about, because, I don't want to close Dunlow and I don't want to close Genoa. I want to keep them there as long as we possibly can. But with the way that the state has this funding formula set up, it's putting a choke on us. I mean, it's just.
And so the first column in each, the one for professional, again, the state average 72.45. For service personnel, that state average 54.34. The more those numbers climb towards that state average, then the more positions that allows for us.
Let me, how's it going to affect like a Hancock County, it's got 91.85 in some of those. I mean, some of the bigger.
It's going to help them as well. It's going to drop their numbers.
Oh, it helps everybody.
Yeah, it would help every county regardless.
So basically, it's going to be that per 1,000, no matter what county you're in.
Correct.
Okay.
See, I've had this concern and when we were going to close schools two or 3 years back, when you close schools in a community like Genoa or Dunlow, you're affecting that community. You're affecting the identity of that community and everything else. So it needs to be there, but we need help so we can keep those little schools open.
Right.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Senator.
I'm cutting in and out. It's my cell phone's fault. I understand to adjust the equation so everybody gets more money. I feel, well, first, want our community schools to be open. We need to have the community schools open for the community. We don't need to have kids riding an hour and a half each way to school. That's not productive, and it just adds to the disciplinary problems. There's a multitude of reasons that we need to keep these schools open. Is there perhaps something that we can add into the law that would focus on our community schools and that may come at a lower price tag, to keep our at-risk community schools in place and operating, but maybe not changing that entire equation for everyone throughout the entire state? Now, that it would hit every community school throughout the entire state, but it might come in at a lower dollar amount.
Yeah, I understand the question you're posing. I don't have an answer for that.
If I might interject there, there are a couple issues that come into play here, and one is I think the Department of Education, when you go through and you look at their budget, and I think last year it was something like 4.2 billion, something to that effect, and you look at all the different directions in which they divert money, pet projects and you name it. And then they have the, I'll just say the audacity to come and say, well, you need to shut down Genoa, or, you need to shut down Dunlop because of a, formula. When they need to recognize that experience we were talking about just a little bit ago, the student experience, that is central to instructional strategy. That is an instructional strategy to look at a student's daily experience in a particular school and try to understand how that impacts their overall learning and development. And there's research out there that indicates that, in particular for low-income communities, consolidation impacts those completely differently from upper-income communities. And students from those lower-income communities, they really struggle in the larger school sizes, whereas students from the higher-income communities don't struggle. In fact, oftentimes they do even better in the larger school if they're already starting out from the higher SES position. So I said all that to say this, that we need to put the onus and give a mandate, I believe, to the Department of Education to reprioritize and reconsider the value proposition of these smaller schools. So we're not putting all the burden on, the counties to try to figure it out on their own. And so that's kind of my focus as it pertains to this, and that's where my thoughts have been with it.
We agree completely. I mean, that's one of our, I think we're probably one of the last counties with 2 schools that have 50 or less students in them.
Are you still on the education committee?
Unfortunately, I don't have to sit through those meetings this year, but no, I'm not on the committee, but I'm working with people who are and people who aren't, and we've been discussing ways to address this. And I think we can do quite a bit without having to necessarily add any more financial burden to the state, just working within what's already going to the Department of Education. I think we can.
Are you by chance on the education committee?
Health.
I figured that, but.
I'm a little blown away because I come from an area of the county that my smallest school is probably a couple hundred students.
Right.
I believe probably Vincent, one of the schools, or Kellogg there, a couple hundred students. So do these schools, they operate completely independently like my larger schools in the north? They have principal, secretary,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
teachers for every grade,
Usually.
and there's only 50 students.
Right.
Well, they got split grades.
Some of them have
have
to.
to-
It
do
kind of
some
goes
of
back
that.
to where, when I grew up, I went to a one-room schoolhouse for,
And the teachers
For-
taught multiple grades.
Right. So we have,
4
we do have some
years.
split grades.
and there was a bunch of us that ended up with college degrees and things like that. But you still had to have administration there on the local scene,
Janitors.
and janitors, and you had to have a certain number of people to have the school there. But if you take it away, it's detrimental to that community.
And those students moreover than anyone.
And I know there's more administrative duties now than, look, I went first 7 years in school. I went to Wilson Elementary. They closed it in 1968. We had about 50 some students then. And a lot of them did very well later in life. We believe, look, half a dozen years ago, we gave it came up a proposal to consolidate Genoa and Dunlop. And I'll tell you how the vote went. We were all against it. We don't want to see those smaller schools close if we can avoid it. If we get in a financial straitjacket,
We have no choice.
that's what we're trying to avoid.
And we're close.
We need help.
I think the rest of the nation is going back to what you're talking about, right?
Right, but as long as West Virginia's funding formula is this
I know.
way.
Yeah, it
That's what
won't.
I'm saying. It's just going against what the trend is.
Yeah.
And the thing of it-
These smaller schools.
And just like Delegate Dillon said, it's an experience for these people. for these kids, that's their home, that's their community, that's their school, and they identify there, and that
Tears
that
the guts
means
out
more
of the
than-
community if you close that
Right,
school.
and it
And when
means
you do
more
that,
than
you
than
put
the
kids
dollars
on the
that it
school
takes to
buses
put into
longer
that
each day going and coming, which is a burden on them and their family and the school system too. So
Right.
there's adjustments need to be made. I think the legislature needs to take action because it's the State Board of Education, they do things trying to please the legislature, but they throw their own little things in there too,
That's another conversation too. We can pass all the rules and laws we want.
But
They
the
don't
thing of it
necessarily
is,
have to follow them.
I think all groups need to get together and come to some kind of understanding what's going to be the best.
Understand.
Let me address that point just for a second, because that
We've had that discussion.
this has been put out before the public, like the legislature has no control over the State Board of Education. When if you read the Constitution of West Virginia, it says
We do.
they shall perform such duties as may be prescribed by the legislature. It's very clear in black and white there, and I'm not exactly sure how they keep getting away with it.
They probably had to change the state constitution. That
It's already in the Constitution.
Allows for it to be
Over that,
Senator Maynard.
we need to go back to the Constitution.
The rulemaking authority, though, doesn't have to come before the legislature. So they can pass the rules and we have no say in it.
And you overrule.
No, we have, unless we legislated the next year.
Bad stare decisis. It's just terrible stare decisis.
The West
I mean,
Virginia
no
school
one can read the
system.
Constitution. The senator is correct in how we're proceeding. He is correct. But I would say that it's horrific stare decisis. And how to get over that without an amendment is a different story, but the senator is correct.
I'll
West
mention,
Virginia school system is probably the most regulated school system in the country,
Yes.
but everybody has a fault in that.
Absolutely.
The state board and the legislature and the courts.
Right.
They've all brought that something. Court rulings cause the state board to put out directives which burden the local counties.
Right.
It's a big mess. It needs to be worked out.
I think any law which is passed is presumed constitutional unless it's challenged and overturned. So I think you go ahead and I think you pass whatever you think is the right policy into code to enforce. And then if someone wants to challenge it, if the state board wants to challenge it, let them do so. But you go ahead and you do the right thing first, and then you deal with the consequences. You lead. We need
If it's a
leadership.
good law that is challenged, the Department of Education will have given the voters the reason to pass an amendment. They will hand them the reason.
there's one final thing I wanted to mention. I don't have a suggestion or anything, but I'll just tell you a problem that we're dealing with is that the construction costs per square foot on any construction projects that we're doing has skyrocketed.
Right.
We have went from $300 a square foot prior to the pandemic to our latest project that's underway right now is over $600 per square foot. And we're getting ready to try to build a Buffalo K-8 to keep that community school there and to put that elementary, replace that elementary, put it with the middle school. And I'm worried to death about the budget for that project. We got a significant grant from the state to do that project, but we've got to make it fit within the budget. And the cost is just crazy right now. And so if anything comes before you while you're in session regarding that, if there's anything you can do to help, we're looking at some things ourselves to try to work on those designs to, help get those within cost. But if anything comes up like that, just know it's a problem for us. I'm sure it's been a problem for the county commission as well.
Very much so.
Now, when you talk about, is that done by, are those jobs bid through state contractors? Do they have to have be a state contractor to?
Yeah, they have to be licensed in the state of West Virginia.
Well, what I'm saying is federal government says you can't purchase, you can't go out and get
Chair or a computer or something. It's
or,
not.
or anything, even building things, there are contractors that you have to, that's why everything's so high in the federal government when you go to do things. Is the state are they burdened by that, or can you go out and get the lowest bid? Or not the lowest necessarily, but the best bid for like building a school?
Yeah, we're required to take the lowest bid as
Yeah.
long as they have the
And
capacity to perform the job.
So you could go out there and choose.
Yeah, we advertise, solicit. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Because a lot of, like the federal government,
You have to
you're
pick
bound by
But a lot of times that's not a good idea either,
what
to go with the lowest bid.
No, that's what.
I mean, I'm just saying from
That was an
experience.
example of
Federal
that.
government
Yeah.
doesn't say that now. It
No,
says the
but with the
best
state,
Or most qualified bid.
with state, we have to go with the lowest.
See, that's
What's the impetus for consolidating the elementary school and the middle school? Is the elementary school ran down or
Oh, gosh.
something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
It's
What's the issue? Roof
It's a-
leaking or?
it's had flooding. It's older. I
It's
went to elementary
flooding.
school
That
there.
Buffalo-
and-
Is that-
Yeah, we had to do,
I can imagine that school flooding.
Well,
It's down on
it's kind of deceiving.
we fixed it.
Yeah.
There was drainage issues. It's a metal panel on a concrete slab. It was a temporary building that was put up that wasn't meant to be up near as long as,
It has
it's just
been.
poor construction. They need a new school. It was our biggest need. So we've secured some funding to do that, and hopefully we can follow through, get it finished.
Is the kindergarten, I spoke with you like a few months ago, the kindergarten's not being used, or is it over at the elementary school, or?
Yeah.
They've had a loss of enrollment. So they used to have a kindergarten building across the road.
Right.
There was some danger with that.
Yeah.
So they moved the kindergarten over into the main building. So currently it's being used by our technology people. Yeah. But anyway, keep that in mind. I do want to say that I want to brag about the teachers and the staff and service personnel in Wayne County Schools. If you look at some of the national ranking sites, we're ranked 15th in the state of West Virginia out of 55 school districts. And we have actually, our ranking right now is as high. The only other time we were ranked as high was in 2018. And that repeated itself last year. Now we've got a lot of work. And as you know, the education results in West Virginia aren't where they need to be. So what we're focused on is trying to get into the top 10. Our teachers and our principals, everybody out in the schools is doing a fantastic job. And we've seen some good results, but we need to see better. So everybody's focused on that. But I wanted to let you know that your system here is doing a pretty good job, and we're striving to do more.
They are working hard.
Mr. Superintendent, I had a complaint that you guys don't have the flexibility to alter bus runs easily. Is there any truth to that?
That's a personnel law thing. So once a run is bid and established, and again, that's not my area. I'm telling you what I know. I can follow up with you on it. Once a run is bid or established, it can only, any change you make to it can only be a certain length of time, like let's say 20 minutes. If it impacts the route more than 20 minutes, you can't do it.
Now, is that annually, or how often can you change?
Yeah, it would be annually. If you would want to change the route, you would have to go through the reduction in force process during personnel season. Then you could eliminate it and then repost it however you wanted. You can change it annually. But to change it in the middle of the year is difficult unless it's a small change.
And so you do that annually. I guess you change them.
Yes, as needed. Yeah. Gentlemen, we really appreciate you being here.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Kind of a question, kind of a request. We have any more our teachers, the newer teachers that are starting. I've introduced the bills before that when I was started, we were able to save our sick time. That actually meant something when we retired. We could use it for years of service. We could use it for insurance. Somewhere in between the time I started and the time I retired, most of our teachers lost that. Robbie,
I can still use mine. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's if you were hired 2015 or later.
Yeah.
You can't really use it for anything.
so my request for this delegation, if you would, to try to look into trying to get that bill moving, that our teachers, so we don't have the massive amounts of absenteeism that we have, because they get 15 days and it's kind of like you use them or you lose them. So what are you going to do?
So I've had a bill for a couple of years to convert unused sick days to cash value. And that's something that's been asked of me by teachers.
I used mine for years of service.
Yeah.
Too.
It was great.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to use them. I mean, it's almost seen as part of your compensation package, as Mr. Ross said there. I have a question when we can get to it.
And let me say this, and then you ask your question if you don't care, Mr. or Senator Hart. One of the issues I've seen with that is particularly with administrators who might have, hundreds of days, but they can't get any cash value out of those days that they've accumulated. So what they do then is they may take off a year or 2/3 of a year, and then you have a school without a leader with a substitute administrator for the biggest part of the year, and the school flounders. Now, I'm not speaking to any specific situation in Wayne or Mingo County. I'm just saying that I've seen it, and
they get leave while they're on that, taking that time off, they gain more sick time. And so all those benefits just keep going. And you can't hire anybody in their place.
right. So you're good to go, Senator.
Yeah, I want to echo Dr. Dillon there, and that's, I don't blame an administrator for that at all. If that administrator was my father, I would encourage them to spend time with their family and get that cash. So that's a legislative, that's a rule problem, that's a disaster, and that's not an individual administrator problem by any means. Anywhere it may happen, and it's going to happen across the state until it's fixed. Now, the Genoa Dunlow issue is kind of near and dear to my heart, as I was a victim of consolidation. And after graduation, my principal was brought up to me, or my former principal, that almost all their disciplinary issues came from a certain school that had been consolidated, which made perfect sense because it was made up of a different culture with different needs that were not being addressed as specifically within a classroom. So it kind of bled out to the entire school. Now, of course, I was part of that student body that was consolidated in, and was the problem. But we weren't a problem when we were in our area. We weren't a problem when we were in our community. So it's a whole other bag of worms, or can of worms, that I think the Department of Education is too blind to see. So my question is, and I don't expect this anytime, this week or anything like that, is outside of just changing the overall formula for the urban schools and everyone's school for the teacher funding formula, if you all could look at, or I don't know, I don't want to give anyone a big job here that they're not an expert at, but I feel like the superintendent's probably an expert at this. If you could look at some cheaper ways that we can save our community schools, be that in Wayne County, McDowell, wherever they may be across our state, that we can allocate some teachers and some resources and some administration that would be widely accepted, or at least widely enough that we can get this through. Now, I know that Senator Maynard has been working to try to keep these schools in, and we want to keep them. So if Plan A doesn't work, maybe if we have a Plan B right there ready to go, that could be a little bit cheaper for the state to manage, especially if we're looking at some shortfalls. That'd be greatly appreciated, because if I sit down and get a plan, it may not be anywhere nearly as good and well thought out as the superintendent.
Thank you. Thanks for the offer.
Absolutely. All right. Anyone else? Well, thank you again for
Gentlemen,
coming.
thank you.
I think we've had a great discussion, and we may not have solved a lot of problems, but at least we're headed in the right direction.
We've addressed
And
them
we're all on the
anyway.
same page, so I appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, appreciate all of you coming to,
Do we have any-
spending your evening with us.
You know what, before you adjourn,
Okay.
I got a suggestion. And I've attended a meeting like this in Mercer County. And they will look at the code and see the problem that is affecting them. And it helps, instead of just telling us your problem, to actually find it in the code. And then you do your own bill drafting. You don't draw a line through the portion of the code that you don't like. You add in what you do like. Mark can probably attest to this.
Oh, I can do that.
It helped to spoon
He's on it.
you know,
Can we appoint you a committee to do that, Mark?
Yeah.
That's a
Committee
great
of one.
idea. Yeah, because that way, you know, because at least from my perspective, the more you can help me to help you, then
Right.
I think the better off we are. Because I think everyone here is wanting to help and
Sure.
make us, you know.
I think that's a great idea.
go away, so.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
We want to adjourn?
Mark?
Oh,
Mark made the motion. Second.
second.
Oh, Janita beat you. Sorry.
I don't know how you beat me to a job.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We're done.
Thank you, Senator Hart.
Doctor,
Thank you.
it's nice to meet you. I'm sorry you didn't get to speak up more. You had big mouths like me.
Oh, shoot. I'm so